Comic-Con Day 3.
Day 3. Yeah.
How's everyone doing?
Here. It's actually alright.
It's Sunday, a little slower. So, who's excited for this panel? That was unneeded. Let's try that again. Who's excited for this panel? We accept no substitutes in this room, Sunday notwithstanding. So we'll get started here in just a moment. We have some fantastic panelists lined up for you. And
Line up.
heck, I'm right here. And there we go. In a row, 2 by 2. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started right now. And we will have John join us shortly. In the interim, I'd like to introduce your moderator, the Notorious DHK.
Hello, hello. Give it up for Greg. Oh, come on, you can do better than that. And also, please give it up for Gary Whitta and Jon Paquette. I just want to check, how many writers or aspiring writers do we have in the room? All right. Job applications will be accepted at no. Guys, I want to start with, what's the first story you remember hearing, reading, playing, seeing that had a huge impact on you?
Remember those Choose Your Own Adventure books?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I had a lot of those as a kid, and I would read them over and over and over again. Of course, I would cheat and go to the end and look at all the endings, but.
For our younger audience members, that's like Bandersnatch, but a book.
Yeah, probably a lot of those, and Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah.
I guess everyone says Star Wars. I worked on Star Wars, so it's an obvious thing for me to say. And yes, certainly that was a huge part of it for me. But perhaps even more specifically, because I'm a Brit, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and I don't know how many people here have ever seen a movie called Time Bandits.
Oh my gosh.
But that probably more than anything sparked my imagination to oh my god, you can just do anything. Just your imagination can just go absolutely insane. And those are huge influences on me.
So success is obviously exciting and an important part of anyone's career, but so are the tougher moments, and so is failure. So are there any kind of particularly, I don't want to say painful, but formative rejections that helped you out along the way?
The rejection is constant. I think we writers tend to get used to it after a while, but every rejection is formative, I think, because it helps you understand how you're doing as a writer, especially when it's rejection with some good criticism, so you can start to understand what you're doing well and what you're not doing well. So I don't know. And film school for me was just 2 long years of rejection, but it was also 2 long years of understanding what it means to write well. So.
Yeah, I think if you're going to pursue, I give this advice to people. So people often don't like me having me on panels because I've been doing this long enough now that I often come across as very cynical. I would say more pragmatic. But the reality is you're going to get rejected a lot. And even the most successful writers that you've heard of and seen have experienced much more rejection than success. I often equate it to an iceberg. The tiny part of the iceberg that breaks the surface of the water in which you can see, that's the success. The 7/8 of it, which is below the surface of the water, that's all the failure and rejection that the public never gets to see. I'll just break it down into numbers for you. I've been doing this for about 20 years. I've had 3 movies made, which again is amazing. That's 3 more than most people. I'm very, very grateful and proud for all of them. But I've probably written more than 100 screenplays. And I put just as much effort into every one of the other 97, the 3 that you've seen. And it's heartbreaking every time something that you care about and love and nurture doesn't get to find an audience. But somebody told me once, failure is not the opposite of success, it's a part of it. And I do believe that failure can be instructive and can be informative. The number one thing that I think that failure can teach you is, can you deal with it? You can either deal with failure and rejection or you cannot. And there's a kind of a creative Darwinism that goes on that weeds out people that cannot handle rejection. And the only common factor between every successful writer I've ever met is that none of them ever gave up. So you just keep at it and don't let rejection and don't let failure set you back, and just keep going. I mean, how many times did J.K. Rowling get rejected before somebody picked up Harry Potter? That's probably the best example I can think of.
Yeah, I think that's
One clap for J.K. Rowling.
I think that's very true. I mean, I work in video games, and I work on teams, large teams where I tell everybody often that we're all storytellers, and people joke with me a lot. They like to say, oh, to be a programmer you need to know how to write and code. To be an artist you need to know all these skills. To be a writer you just type, right? Like that's all there is.
You know, there's people that come up to you and say, hey, I've got a great idea, I just need someone to write it. Like, that's the easy part.
But I think, jumping off what Gary said, the ability to handle rejection and handle criticism is something that, is not innate to a lot of people. And it's a skill with how you deal with that, and how you turn that into fuel for how you're going to respond and what you're going to do next.
Have you developed any kind of coping techniques in particular that you found useful? That you can kind of
Fetal ball is a good one. In the corner, sobbing. Donuts, always good.
A whole bottle of Chardonnay.
When After Earth came out and got 11% on Rotten Tomatoes, our friends left a box of pity donuts on our front step, which I was very very touched by. But yeah, they tasted like pity.
They could have been celebratory. You got a movie made, but still.
I love all my children equally, even the ugly ones. And yeah, like I said, getting a movie made, I honestly believe that every single, once you've been inside this business long enough and you realize just how hard it is to get a movie made, and how all the planets have to line up just right, and how for every movie that gets made, there's a million that don't, I think honestly they should give an Oscar to every movie just for getting made. And then maybe they should have special platinum Oscars for the movies that are actually good. Because I long ago gave up bashing movies. If you follow me on Twitter, you'll never ever see me bash a film and another person's film. Even if I hate a film, I'll just keep it to myself. If I like it, I'll celebrate it. If I hate it, I'll keep it to myself. Because we all live in glass houses, and I've been doing this long enough to know that even bad movies were really, somebody really tried their best. And even if it didn't work out, it's not because someone was lazy or because they didn't care. It's because it just didn't work out that time.
I'd say the same is true for probably any project, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
A game, anything, This is actually relative to you. What is it like having to plug into an existing IP? Like, I'm sure there's a lot of creative freedom, but there are also challenges that come with it, right? You inherit a Spider-Man, you inherit a Star Wars universe. Like, how does that impact you?
Well, I mean, first off, I freaked out when I, realized that I was going to be able to write a Spider-Man game. That was pretty crazy. But after that, I think my strategy was really to kind of immerse myself in what had come before. Read everything, watch everything, play everything, and then try to forget as much as possible. Kind of imbue myself with the DNA of what makes a great Peter Parker Spider-Man story. And because you don't want to be too affected by a specific piece of work. You want the character to come from inside you, right? So the more you immerse yourself in that character and bring it inside yourself, and then forget everything, I think the truer the character will feel when you actually write it.
Yeah, I mean, 90% of what we were just talking, I did a panel yesterday with Lindsay Beer and Andy Weir about adapting, established properties for the screen. And the reality is 90% of a working screenwriter's life in Hollywood is adapting other people's material. It's kind of a secondary medium. It's very little, like the top 10, I just saw this the other day, the top 10 movies of 2019 so far are all sequels and franchise properties. Jordan Peele's Us is the one unicorn in there. It's the only original film out of the top 10. Everything else is Avengers and Toy Story and Lion King, and those are all great movies, but we've seen, it's all nothing original. because Hollywood doesn't take risks anymore. So, you know, my story was very typical. I broke in to Hollywood with an original piece of material, The Book of Eli. That was 10 years ago. I haven't had an original film made since. I've tried. Everything else has been someone else's idea or someone else's property. Obviously, I'm very grateful to have worked on Star Wars. But you know, if you're going to, especially if you're going to work in Hollywood, you know, get used to the idea that you're probably going to be spending most of your time playing in someone else's sandbox. You know, Star Wars obviously is an incredible sandbox, and there's an incredible sense of responsibility that comes with that. I'll just tell you this: I was 30 pounds lighter before I worked on Star Wars, and I started taking. I had to start taking anti-anxiety medication because it was that stressful. I said to Gareth Edwards, the director, we were sitting around one time in the story room, and because, you know, you all know Rogue One is directly connected to A New Hope. Yes. And I said, this is kind of like, you know, imagine this, like imagine that there's the Taj Mahal, and we're architects that have been asked to build an extension onto the Taj Mahal. And if it's no good, it's just going to be a blight on the Taj Mahal forever. And Gareth said, why did you have to say that? And we were we were obviously very fortunate that it came out well. But, you know, I was terrified. It's the one, you know, I was just telling myself, well, and the Lucasfilm were great. Yeah, don't worry about it, it's going to be great. I was the one saying, don't screw this up, don't screw this up. And again, I just consider it a minor miracle that, you know, we didn't, and people really loved the movie. But yeah, I always tell people, if you want to write movies, really ask yourself if movies are the things you love the most. If you were that kid from Cinema Paradiso, if you were me, you know, just like staring up at the screen, just with your jaw dropped, going, I gotta do this. Like whatever this is, this movie is making me feel right now, I gotta do that for other people. If movies are what you want to do, by all means write movies. If you just want to be a writer, and there are other things you could write, do literally anything else. Write novels, write TV, write plays, write video games, write poetry, because movies are the ones that will kick your ass the most. That's, you know, and again, I'm coming across as cynical, but I've been doing this for 20 years. Trust me, it's really hard. When I was sitting on a panel with Andy Weir yesterday, you know, and people laughed because it's funny, but you realize how farcical it is. I said, Andy's writing a novel right now, his third novel after The Martian and Artemis. And I said to Andy, imagine if you turned in your first draft of the novel, and your publisher said to you, well, we love the novel, Andy, but we don't like the third act. So we're going to bring in Stephen King to rewrite the third act for you. You just laughed because it's farcical. But that's the everyday reality in Hollywood.
I mean, there are worse people to be brought in on
right.
So does that make working on something like the Walking Dead games like a relief?
I mean, Walking Dead was really fun to work on because it's a video game. It's weirdly kind of less pressure. I mean, there's still the pressure of the big franchise. When we were working on the video game, that was when The Walking Dead was like at the height of its. You know, it's obviously waned a little bit since then, but that was when The Walking Dead was like the biggest show on television, and we were all very nervous again in building the extension onto the Taj Mahal and all that stuff. But you know, Telltale was a small company. And you know, it was just a bunch of us in a room kind of having ideas, and we weren't under the auspices of like a Disney or a Warner Brothers, or like, you know, it wasn't like there was $4 billion on the line or anything. So we just kind of got as much creative freedom. Generally, the more money that is at risk, the more risk averse the studio is. You know, with Star Wars, we were terrified because, you know, there's billions and billions of dollars and the memories of children all over the planet at stake. And so we were very nervous about that. So Walking Dead was somewhat less stressful than that.
In terms of writing for video games, there's a whole extra factor, right? Like the audience has agency to a degree, mm-hmm. and you have to give them that because otherwise it's just sort of like why I'm watching a movie, right? Yeah. So do you ever get too attached to like an ending or a storyline or something like that, or is it just like, hey, let's gently guide everyone along the way?
I try not to get too attached because writing in games is such that it's changing all the time. Game development is like that. You know, we always have to see what's fun. We put the controller in people's hands, and if it's not fun, we're just going to cut a mission or cut a whole story beat or, you know, whatever. So, you know, it's kind of like you never really get to the first draft of a game until you get to alpha, which is, you know, pretty late in the process in terms of the game, 2 or 3 years in. So I try not to get too attached to anything, really. We throw away a lot of stuff. And we write a lot of stuff. I think I was telling you, you know, yesterday that You know, the final Spider-Man script has about 400,000 words in it, but we had written about 800,000 words, so we had cut, you know, about twice as much as, or half, or whatever. I'm not good at math.
Half, I believe that is half.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think you do a lot of rewriting, but I do get attached to some things, and you have to have those fights, you know, with people.
Yeah,
Sorry,
it's funny,
discussions.
It's funny you should ask about endings, because I was literally just having this conversation with someone that came by my table earlier today. They asked about Rogue One, and they said, "Wow, did everyone?" If you haven't seen Rogue One, like earmuffs right now. They said, "Was it always the case that everyone?" I get this question a lot. People say, "Did they always die at the end, all of them?" And the answer is originally no. When I first sat down with Gareth to talk about the movie, our very first creative instinct was, I think they should all die. It makes, you know, they do the old, what they do is so important. Think about it, if they don't steal the Death Star plans, the entire Star Wars franchise is basically about the Death Star going around blowing up planets until everyone surrenders. And that's not fun.
I mean, I'd still watch it.
And so we kind of felt like maybe they should, what they're doing is so important, maybe this is a movie about making the ultimate sacrifice. These characters die so that the entire Star Wars franchise might live. And but we were very quickly falling in love with the idea. But Disney had just bought Lucasfilm at that point. We were only the second project greenlit after Force Awakens. And we thought, what if Disney? Like, it's Disney. Like, who knows what they're going to say? Maybe they don't want everyone to die at the end of a Disney film. And we were terrified. And we said, well, if we fall in love with this idea and we feel like it's the only real ending, and then Disney kibosh it, we're going to be heartbroken. And so we didn't do it. K2SO always died. Someone's got to die. But Jen and the other characters lived. And it wasn't until much later when other writers came on and Chris Weitz came in and they read the first draft of my script. They said, I kind of feel like everyone should die. I went, oh my God, yes, that's where we started. And Kathy and Disney and everyone were completely supportive of it. And I love the fact, I agree, it's the only valid ending for the film. I would have been heartbroken if they'd actually shot the first draft of the script that I wrote, which had the cowardly ending where we didn't kill everybody. And so there's something to learn, there's one thing to learn from that. I would say always, like, have no fear. Like, don't set an ending or don't set an idea that you love aside because you're worried someone might say no. Like, follow your best creative instincts, and if you have to fight that battle and die on that hill, die on it. But don't capitulate. Write what you think is right.
I would talk about spoilers for Spider-Man as well. The ending of the Spider-Man game was controversial inside Marvel, you know, Marvel Publishing specifically, and we went back and forth a lot. You know, we shot the scene, we knew that it was great, we knew that it was emotional, but you know, they were worried about killing off a character. And I remember going off on Christmas break. We had just, you know, talked to Marvel and they said, we can't do it. And I remember going off on Christmas break and I'm like, look, I was thinking to myself, the whole story falls apart if you don't have that. Like, we earned that moment. We really worked hard to make that, you know, work, and it works.
So, yeah, I mean, it's another huge personal sacrifice, right?
Right, yeah, and the thing that we, you know, I talked earlier about how, you know, you really try to imbue yourself with the DNA of the character. The thing about Spider-Man is that that I recognized after watching all these things and reading all the comics is that whenever Peter Parker wins, Spider-Man loses, and whenever Spider-Man wins, Peter loses. He's always, you know, trying to find that balance in his life.
That's a great way to put it as well. I like that.
Yeah. So in the end, he wins. Spider-Man wins, but Peter's got to lose, right? And that's, you know, that's what makes him such a great character. So I came back from Christmas break and I said I was going to die on a hill. That was the hill I chose to die on, and luckily we decided to put it in.
What is you mentioned a little bit, like you watched and read all the, well, maybe not read all of the Spider-Man, but you absorbed kind of the other entries into that world.
Mm-hmm.
What are your research processes like? Obviously, it's probably a little hard to be like, I'm going to research space Jedi Knights. Like,
well, I was going to ask Gary, do you think that you need to be a fan of something you're adapting, or can you adapt something if you're not a fan?
I think it helps. I mean, I turn down stuff all the time because I look at it and I'm not a fan. I don't get it. You know, I need to be able to get up in the morning every day, caring about what I do. And by the 20th or 30th rewrite of something, your enthusiasm for something will be exhausted. So you better start with a full tank. Otherwise, you're going to run out of gas. Obviously with Star Wars it was easy, because who wouldn't say no to that? In terms of the research process, that wasn't terribly difficult. We just watched the original movie frame by frame, and I was kind of the canonical cop for it, to make sure that when people, because I know what Star Wars fans are like. They'll
Polite,
yes,
gentle,
lovely,
unopinionated.
And I knew that if we made a mistake, it would be very visible. It wouldn't go unnoticed, because it's huge. Star Wars is hugely visible, and everyone watches it, and everyone's an expert. And so we started with the opening crawl. Rebel spies stole the plans during a battle. And okay, great. There's got to be a big battle. We want one of those in the third act anyway. That's helpful. We all know where the story begins. How do you get to that point? And there was a lot of very, very specific details. Like I'll give you one example. There's a scene in the Death Star conference room where one of the Imperial officers says, "You have not conjured up the stolen data tapes." And I'm writing down, okay, it's got to be tapes. She has to have physical tapes at some point, which is why we ended up with that little hard drive prop that actually looks like tapes. And a million little things like that. And that goes into production design and costuming and performance and everything. But it starts with the writing, and I worked really, really hard to make sure. I had a lot of conversations about, look, it said in A New Hope, it says this. If it doesn't match with that, people will inevitably watch the two movies back to back, and they will know if something does not match. And we did our best to make things match as much as possible. And then in terms of kind of more in-depth research, we did kind of go into the Star Wars galaxy a bit more in depth. I actually was not a super duper Star Wars expert, like in terms of the expanded universe. I know the core movies, and I know some of the other stuff, but I'm not a super expert. But fortunately, Lucasfilm have those people. They have experts. And we talked about how we wanted to have a character, a rebel extremist, that was modeled on like Colonel Kurtz. We wanted who's the rebel Colonel Kurtz? And Kiri Hart, who is she's no longer there, but at the time she was our kind of main story contact, said we have a character there's a character like that in Star Wars, in the Clone Wars, called Saw Gerrera. And what if he turned out to be Colonel Kurtz? And so we were able to bring Saw Gerrera from the Clone Wars into Rogue One, and now he's in Star Wars Rebels, he's in the new video game Jedi Fallen Order, and these characters end up having these lives that kind of migrate across all the different iterations. And so with Lucasfilm, it was relatively easy, because everything I didn't know, they always have someone there in the room that does, and they know it down to a very granular level.
Yeah,
they
Marvel,
really are experts.
I would say Marvel is the same way too. And there's a great wiki. I go to the wiki all the time. I'm like, this guy's only a level 6 power. Shouldn't be a 7 power. They do have people at Marvel that, if you have very obscure questions about characters, you can ask anything, and they'll pull up an issue, from 1967, and you'll be able to get the info that you need, which is really nice.
Well, speaking of Colonel Kurtz,
Hey.
from Apocalypse Now, it's almost as if somebody who wrote that would be here. Please welcome John Milius.
Oh my God.
John, thank you for joining us. I'm gonna ask this to John P. and Gary, since other John is here and is obviously a very prolific and informative writer for many of us. Who are your writing heroes?
I mean, other than people that are now sitting on this.
Yeah, Oh, that's a valid answer.
I don't know.
Douglas Adams, George Lucas, John Milius.
Yes.
I've done that gag already, sorry. I'm sorry, my imposter syndrome is really kicking in hard right now, because I'm sitting on a stage with one of my writing heroes. I've got a whole bunch of. What about you?
Similar list. I would add Stephen King to that. Let's see, Robert Towne, Steven Spielberg. I could go on. But yeah, there's, and then anybody who wrote those Choose Your Own Adventure books that I love this.
John, it's hard having both the Johns next to each other. Who do you turn to for feedback? Because you've collaborated with a lot of great people over the years.
Who do you turn to for feedback?
Histories, very good.
It's a good collaborator.
Yeah.
History and story, very good, yes.
Also, I should note we are going to open up to audience questions in a moment if anyone wants
Yeah,
to
there's a
line up.
mic right there if you want to start lining up.
If you could go back 10 years and give yourself a piece of advice, what would it be and why?
Oh my God. Do something else. No, again, I joke. I can't do anything else. This is the only thing I'm any good at. So I'm very fortunate that I've been successful as a screenwriter and an author and whatever else that I've done. Again, I would just reiterate. I really make sure that film is what you want to write if you want to pursue that course, because it's very, very difficult. And I think a lot of people struggle in film because they're not great collaborators. There are very few auteurs in film who are able to kind of be the sole author of a cinematic work, people that write, direct, and do everything themselves. There are people like that, but they're very few and far between. As a screenwriter, you are creatively, as important as a screenplay is, as a screenwriter, you are often very much at the bottom of the totem pole in terms of the creative pecking order. And you need to be used to getting fired and being replaced. It happens all the time, it's heartbreaking. But that's the reality of it. And it's often tricky because I think for novelists and for authors, it's very easy for them to, a lot of us do this. A lot of us write because we're not tremendously social animals as writers. And the way that we express ourselves is to kind of write something down and then say, here, this is me, and then you run away. And that's how you kind of show yourself to the world and express yourself. But in film, it's not a solo act. For a novelist or a playwright, it can be a solo act. In film, you have to learn to work with producers and directors and actors, almost all of whom are always more powerful than you. And I said it on a panel the other day. The only real power that you have as a screenwriter is the power to persuade people more powerful than you that you are right creatively. And if you can get a director or a producer or an actor on the same page as you, they will then go fight the battles for you. But as a writer, you have almost no power to fight those creative battles because they will just replace you.
Yeah, I would say for me, if I could go back 10 years, I would be less scared to put my work out there and put myself out there. When I started to do that and when I started to accept feedback more regularly, I feel like I became a better writer because I was able to understand what the audience is thinking. And I think that's what happens when you share your work with a wide variety of people, is you start to understand how people think, how other people think, not just yourself. And then you're able to, or at least me, I was able to understand how to craft stories for a larger audience, not just for people like myself.
Okay, first I want to thank all the panelists for being here, but actually I want to also say I actually mainly came to the convention to see John Milius.
Me too.
Here, sir, and,
Yes, all of us
thank you
did.
for taking the effort to come here. I'm very honored that you're here. And so my question is, because there's a long line behind me, is for Conan the Barbarian, I've read that you originally had that set as a trilogy, and I was wondering if you could share any broad strokes about how that was supposed to end.
Very good. The power of powers and assassin, the sun, and very good. Two, the Conan, very good. Yes.
The succession
Yes.
of the son and
Yes,
the
yes.
continuance of
We would have
his
seen like a
life.
lineage.
Yes.
And,
The
yeah.
session and Moral, yes. That would be good.
Just to guess that.
Yes.
I'm not quite sure what he's saying.
Moral, okay.
The moral?
Yes,
The
yes.
moral of the story?
Yes. Moral, good, yes.
Of good.
Yes, yes.
Is
Thank you so much, sir.
As far as films go, though, it's a pretty good standalone, I'd like to think.
Hi, so my question's actually for Gary. When you were talking earlier about how many screenplays you've written and how, the process of trying to get them accepted and not accepted and whatnot, I was wondering, what genre did you mainly write? Am I to assume it was mainly sci-fi?
Yeah, I'm a genre guy. I grew up, again, if you heard earlier, my main influences, Hitchhiker's Time Bandit, Star Wars, things like that. And even the cheesy stuff, Knight Rider, I grew up on all of that stuff. And I would struggle to write like a romantic comedy or things like that. I've done other things. I've written historical fiction and things like that. But I always, everything gets filtered through a genre lens. Like the Book of Eli was, I grew up loving Westerns and I grew up loving samurai movies. And the Book of Eli was my attempt to write a Western and a samurai movie. But by the time I was done, it got filtered through kind of a post-apocalyptic science fiction lens. And everything that I do is going to inevitably kind of have that. I mean, I wrote a World War II movie. Like I used to love movies like The Guns of Navarone and The Dirty Dozen and Kelly's Heroes and stuff like that. And I always wanted to write one, like a homage to those kind of movies. But I ended up putting science fiction into that as well. This whole crazy idea about the Nazis were building like a secret super weapon that they had put together from stolen plans of Nikola Tesla and all this kind of crazy stuff. And by the end, it went into kind of sci-fi territory. So no matter what I try to write, I will always end up kind of veering into that territory because that's kind of my true north. That's just what I like to do.
So what was it when you were writing them, like, obviously, as you were saying, you had 3 screenplays that were accepted. What kept you going in that genre? Why didn't you not give up?
Well, I mean, I was very fortunate that the first couple of screenplays that I wrote fully intending to sell, I actually did sell. I wrote a bunch. What happened was I wrote about 5 or 6 just for practice, things that I knew would not be good enough to sell, but I'm not a big believer in reading lots of screenwriting books and going to screenwriting seminars and things like that. I think you can tie yourself up in knots doing that stuff. There are books that I can recommend to you, and I think you can learn a lot by reading scripts and things like that. But just me personally, I'm very autodidactic. I learn by doing. I learn by trying and failing. And I tried and failed with a bunch of scripts, and each one that I wrote, I took what I learned from the last one and applied it to the next. And each script that I wrote was like slightly less terrible than the last. And because I didn't show those early scripts to anyone, I didn't have to worry about the rejection because there was no one to reject them. And it wasn't until I wrote the first scripts that I thought, okay, maybe this one's good enough to show to someone, that I sent it out, and that's how I got my first manager and my first agent. And then the next thing that I wrote was the first thing that I sold, and the next thing that I wrote after that was the first thing that got made. So I didn't actually start getting rejected and experiencing failure until after I broke in.
Sorry, that was probably a wrong what word you used. I didn't mean failed, but.
No, for me, it's a great word to use.
Do you guys ever still write just for you?
I try when we have time. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah. There was a period where I was quite disillusioned with screenwriting, and I went away and wrote a novel because I thought this can be just for me, and no one can give me notes, no one can fire me. It can just be me. And that novel ended up getting published, so that worked out. But even if it hadn't been, it would have been a very therapeutic exercise.
And sometimes you have an idea that you just can't get out of your head. You have to write it down. You have to do the work of working out the story.
So this is a question about video games, storytelling. And I was just thinking about your, John P., your point about choose your own adventure books.
Mm-hmm.
So I think about some really cool games I've played, like Witcher 3, some of the Mass Effect games. It's like in Witcher 3, you don't even know you're choosing your own ending. Mm-hmm. And that's a really cool concept that messes with you, where you end up telling the story in a way. So I'm wondering whether, as a trend in video game design, do you see that as something that's going to continue?
Yeah, I think there's, well, what's great about games nowadays is that there's such a vast audience and there's a lot of different types of games that can be made. There are the kind of the linear, like Spider-Man, linear AAA action games. But then there are the kind of open world, like Assassin's Creed or The Witcher. And there are those games take a whole team of writers. I think there were 21 writers on Assassin's Creed Odyssey. It takes a lot of people coming together. But for the player, what you want the player to experience is that they're in this huge world that's living, right? And you want them to be able to feel like they're part of this world for 100 hours or however long it is that your goal is. And you have to create stories for all these different characters in there and accept the fact that sometimes they're never going to see those stories, right? But it's something that I think, like I said, the audience is growing and then they really expect, sophistication in that kind of storytelling.
John, Gary, other John. I'm looking
You're
for
the
some
other John.
advice.
I am the other John. I will always be the other John.
I'm looking for some advice. How do I write for a character that's not like me?
Very carefully.
I'm sorry, say the question again?
How do you write for a character who's not like you? So writing for a protagonist, I assume that doesn't come from a similar background, or.
I mean, no, I don't think any of my characters are like me.
Yeah.
I'm nothing like Eli. I don't have anything in common with Jyn Erso. I think that's part of the fun is inhabiting the life of someone else for the brief period that you're writing them. I don't think of myself as those characters. I might think of those characters as aspirationally someone that I would like to be. I like to write characters that are more moral and more courageous and better people than I am because they're heroes. And maybe there is something aspirational in doing that. By writing those characters, you kind of teach yourself who the person you want to be is by realizing that those values in a fictional character.
Yeah, I've often thought that there's a part of being a writer that is like being an actor, where when you sit down at your computer or wherever it is that you write, you put yourself into another character. And that character might be completely different than you on the outside. But if there are parts of you on the inside that you want to bring out through that character, whether it be the way that they talk or the way that they feel about peanut butter and jelly sandwiches or whatever, that's kind of what we do as writers, is we embody these other characters like an actor does, except we don't do it in front of a camera, I guess.
Is it sometimes harder to write objectively about a character who is more like you?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I definitely have, when I say none of my characters are like me, I'm specifically referring to, like, again, the heroic attributes of those characters. But, really good heroes and really good characters are probably defined more by their flaws than by their positive attributes. And I have lots of flaws. And, that can be, I think that can be something you can draw on.
I'm also very self-deprecating, and I tend to do that with a lot of my characters, is make them fail often.
Which they have to, which they absolutely have to.
And I think that's what gets audiences, because we feel like we're constantly failing. That's what gets audiences invested in these characters, because you see that yourself in these characters.
There was an article just the other day, and it got a bit of attention. It was about how the current generation of action heroes, like The Rock and Vin Diesel and Jason Statham, are all very, very concerned about whether it was accurate or not, I don't know, but the story that came out was that a lot of these actors are very concerned about not looking tough and heroic and awesome. And
the punch clause.
Yeah, it's like, I have to punch you as many times as you punch me and this kind of stuff, and I can't lose a fight, I don't want to look bad. And they seem to kind of miss the point. I mean, the example that I gave was, look at Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones fails constantly. He gets the crap beat out of him in almost every fight. The point is he keeps getting back up. And that's what makes a character heroic. The fact that they keep going on despite their failures, not the fact that they don't experience failure.
John M., I'm assuming this was never a concern on something like Conan. I'm assuming Arnold Schwarzenegger, you didn't have to write for...
Yeah, I mean, Conan pretty much just constantly kicks ass, right?
one of my favorite writers, Barry Longyear, was once asked, where do you get your ideas? The answer is Schenectady. So I don't want to be that general a question. What I would like to know is there any story you've done where you can trace it back to some specific incident or something that happened in your life that inspired that story?
Were either of you bitten by a spider?
I wish I was every day.
I mean, in a real life example, you know, the character of Eli in the whole Book of Eli movie came from the fact that my wife and I were invited to a post-apocalyptic Halloween party. It's a true story. And we got dressed up as these characters. And I was like, I don't want to go as like Mad Max or like some existing character. Like, I want to be an original character. And, you know, we went to like thrift stores and found costumes and stuff and dirtied ourselves up. And in the process of creating that costume, I started thinking about like, who is this guy? And originally he was just like a crazed preacher. He had like a Bible in one hand and a machete in the other. And he was like this crazed preacher who was going out to try and bring the word of the Lord to the kind of the irradiated mutants out in the wasteland. And it was very schlocky. But as I started thinking about it more, I started to kind of add, like, try to kind of, maybe there's something here. Like, if we're going to talk about religion, let's try and do something with it. And the character kind of became a little bit more sophisticated, and that's how Eli was born. So, you know, inspiration can come from really random. Like, if I had not been in, I believe a lot in luck. People often say it's better to be lucky than good. I think, you know, if you can be a bit of both, that's the key. But a lot of my career has been defined by luck. If my friend Mike had not invited me to the Halloween party, I might not have the career I have today. It's crazy to think about.
Great, thank you.
Was Sunset Overdrive also inspired by a post-it note?
No,
Did
but
you drink a soda that...
I was actually thinking Sunset Overdrive is a game that I wrote that, you know, it wasn't the inspiration for the game, but the inspiration for the characters really came from when I met Yuri Lowenthal and Stephanie Lemlin, who played the two different player characters in that game. And getting to know them personally, you know, brought out a character that it really inspired me to create a lot of the dialogue and everything for those characters. So just getting to know certain people, I think, can often be an inspiration.
What are your future works like? Are you gonna make another season of The Walking Dead?
No, The Walking Dead video game is done. That was the 4th season, was very definitively considered the final season. And the developer that makes it, Telltale Games, doesn't even exist anymore. So we're pretty much done with Clementine's story. But The Walking Dead TV show is apparently going to go on forever. So
Zombies.
Yeah, no end in sight. Yeah. I hope so. Otherwise, I'm going to have to struggle to put food on the table. Yeah, I'm working on a movie for a studio right now. I'm trying to get some TV stuff going. I just finished a new novel. Yeah, I'm trying to keep busy. Can't tell you.
Literally, it's called Can't Tell You. It's about no one.
So, for games like The Walking Dead and games like Spider-Man, where one of them has a definitive ending and one of them has multiple, what are the challenges between both of them, and just like having way more dialogue options in one that means something as opposed to the other, and also making the gamer or the player feel like in both they have some semblance of control when they play?
Yeah, I would say the biggest challenge, or one of the biggest challenges on Spider-Man was, you know, this false sense of urgency, because when you create a kind of a linear story, you really want people to be drawn through with like high stakes. You know, you really want the character to care about, you know, oh my gosh, I gotta go do this right now. I need to save these people right now. But you also, in a game like that, you want people to be able to say, oh, I'm not going to do that right now. I'm going to go over here and pick up some backpacks, or you know, do this or whatever. So trying to you know, kind of thread that needle of you know, not making the player feel like they or the player character is not part of the world. That's a really hard thing to do, and it's something that we struggle with a lot. But if you'll notice in Spider-Man near the end. Things got pretty fast and linear, and that was on purpose. We really wanted to, like, as soon as you basically went into Act 3, the train started moving really fast.
I've noticed a lot of games do that. Mass Effect is like, there's a kind of a tipping point where the game always says, like, once you cross over here, that's it. There's no going back, right? Because you want the third act to move forward.
Yep. Yeah.
All right, we're going to speed through these last 3.
I wanted to ask, when you were chasing your career and your dreams, did you ever have life conflict with that? And was there ever a goal or dream that you had to compromise on?
Every day. Yeah. I mean, life is a balance, right? So you always have to balance and make choices. And sometimes those choices are really hard when you have to choose between your career or maybe someone that you love or something that you love. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very fortunate that writing in one form or another has always been my profession since I was 15 years old. I'll tell you this, I mean, I had two careers. I was a video games journalist for many years and then I became a screenwriter. I don't think I ever would have had the courage to roll the dice and quit a very successful and fun career that I had in the world of video games. The truth is, I got the sack. My career came to an end. I got laid off. The company that I worked for imploded. I got laid off. And I was forced to decide what I wanted to do with my life. Do I want to get back on the same train that I just got kicked off, or maybe get on a different train? And I decided to get on a different train. But again, it's the whole sliding doors thing. Had I not been laid off, I might still be the editor-in-chief of PC Gamer today, and I'm sure I'd be very happy, but I wouldn't be doing this.
John Paquette secretly hoped you were going to say with great power came great responsibility.
So my question is about writing video games. It's way more easier if I want to like read a screenplay or a comic book script, for example. It's very easy to find it. There's an archive and a lot of scripts. How can I find like video game scripts? Is there an archive or?
There's not really an archive. I bet if you go on Reddit, you'll find some links to some scripts. You know, I would love to share more scripts, and I'll work on that. You know, I'm not the one that gets to decide what to share with the world. But I feel you, and I get that question a lot actually. Like, what does a video game script look like? It actually looks a lot like a film script. It's just a lot longer. I think that the content that we made for Spider-Man was essentially like a series of like maybe a season's worth of hour-long TV, you know, something along those lines.
Or you do what Gary did and just watch every frame of every game.
Yeah.
With Star Wars, you know what he did.
Yeah.
Do your best works tend to start as a big idea, and then you write it down, and then you figure out what you're trying to do and say, or is it more of a deliberate thing? Like, you're trying to figure out what you're trying to do and say, and then create in order to tell that story?
I think it can be a bit of both. I always like to, I'm very big on theme. I always like to think about theme, and it's the kernel of an idea, but I won't commit to it and I won't get excited about it unless I feel like there's some kind of thematic underpinning. I always say, like, it can't just be empty calories. There's got to be some nutritional content in there. You know, I'm not a fan of the kind of films that you forget about the next day. I'd rather, I like films that linger in your imagination and make you think for long after you've seen them. And I think the films that successfully do that are those that start with some kind of interesting philosophical or thematic question. Films that have something to say are the ones that generally tend to linger in the memory. So I tend to start there.
Yeah, and I would say that for me, oftentimes the theme that I start with is not the one that I end up going with, because as you explore in the story, a different theme might kind of come through with the characters. So I'll at any point during the writing take a step back and say, okay, what are we really saying with this piece of work?
All right, so my very last question is, if you use one word to have your kind of legacy described, what would you hope it would be?
Oh God.
Hardworking.
I'm just going to go with oh God. I think I got it right the first time. Are we done? Oh, good.
If you had one word to describe your legacy, what would it be?
I don't know.
You can describe yours. It's legendary.
Actually, that's a better answer. I'm going to go with I don't know as well. I don't think they do that.
Hot shoes, the samurai, very good, yes.
Samurai? I like that.
Very good, okay, yes. And Paul Shuzo, okay. Paul Shuzo, okay, okay. Okay, the Japanese.
Japanese is
Bushido.
Oh, Bushido, yeah, the way of the warrior. I love it.
Yeah. That is a great word, yeah. All right, I want to thank my panelists so much. Thank you to Gary, John, and Don.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming today. One more round of applause for our panelists. Notorious team today. Now, if I could have everyone exit from the open door on my left-hand side, I would very much appreciate that. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your experience.
Thank you, that was good. Yeah, of course. Do you want me to just sign it and take it out to someone? What's your name? Michael? Okay. Spell that again for me? Oh,